this around as much, and we can kind of start doing it as more, I don't know, like kind of open ended. I If a lot of people start joining, then we'll start like selecting moderators, like who can kind of kick people out if like, I mean, I've been in these before where like someone's like mic is on and they're doing something crazy, or like someone just comes in and starts like cursing. I was in like a clubhouse once and someone started saying crazy stuff to like G Money. But within reason, I would rather use this format so we can just have like a conversation, and then like we can also just go through like pre-AMA questions, and if people have like, you know, important ones like that they think that we should address, then I think like this is just an all around better format, because like the point of this is we can have a one-to-one discussion, not that I just come on and like otherwise I could just record this thing, right? Like there's no point in us doing it at a set time, and I want it to be more where we can actually interface with each other, because like there's people in the community that I know that like deeply care about BarnBridge, and like I want to talk to them. But naturally, like if you guys saw all my messages and notifications and just the amount of projects that reach out to me to like for funding, it's like I get thousands of messages a day, and then I go into BarnBridge's Discord, and I've got to then get caught up there. So it's easier for me to kind of keep everything in like one set place, and then people from the community or Pablo, if like something like really needs my attention, they'll end up flagging me, which is why I don't like bang out in the Discord quite as much as I used to. But I'm trying to pick that up because like, um, a, like it obviously is something that everyone like deserves, since it is a community run protocol, or at least like it will be long term as we build more and more tech into it. But does anyone have like any specific things that like are in the pre-AMA channel that you want to talk about specifically to this? I know everybody's generally waiting for a roadmap. I would say that I also am waiting for a roadmap. Like, we should be able to get like a solidified form early next week. I have one that's like loose enough, or that I could formulate into some type of like a Medium post, but ultimately I'm kind of waiting like everybody else for some like solidified like hard numbers and timelines. um, I know that like we've been talking with like some major funds about the Sailor like concept specifically, and a lot of the there I think there's like less like degen interest in the Sailor idea and way more like institutional interest. Um, and then there's just like the obvious like smart yield.
I didn't get that.
The core dev team to focus on one thing at a time, and then see what we can like bite off in other ways, for a lot of different reasons. But I think that they're saying that like somewhere in like the April-ish range that they think that they can have Sailor complete. Uh, Realistically, that means it's going to fall into March or May. Um, but I am extremely excited about that product. And then I think we just need to kind of track how it's like getting pushed along. Um, Another like generalized update is that I've teased this to the community or loosely talked about it, but a lot of the uh, people on like the operation side, like because we're a DAO first organization and really like the first one, we've had to like learn a lot of things like legally what you can do and what you can't do as like a core team. And like the purpose of a DAO, at least for like what we were talking about when we did DAO first, like I know there's like Pleaser DAO and people are using them to like bootstrap money for a ton of various things, and they're calling them DAOs. They're really just kind of like advanced like multi-sigs essentially, which is what a DAO is at scale. But The purpose of like the actual DAO is to power like the BarnBridge protocol. Um, so like when Olympus is basically like providing services at like on behalf of a DAO, I think that they start to get into uh, I don't know how to say this because like I'm in love with Olympus and I don't want it to sound like I'm saying anything bad. It's not something that like maybe us in America should be doing because it puts us at like regulatory pressure, meaning like if I go out and provide a service personally, um, and the DAO is compensated for it, that starts to look like much more like a company essentially. And so like what as opposed to I use Smart Alpha and it's a permissionless protocol. Anyone can plug into it. You don't actually need anyone to do anything. And the DAO then accumulates revenue from it, like similar to how like Aave works. Like that's really the purpose of a DAO is to power something like that. I've always thought that like around these DAOs, because right now they kind of do look like companies because like Aave is an interface that you can go to but Aave has the foundation, right? So they have more like flexibility. But realistically, Aave should just be a protocol, and then like other interfaces and other companies can get built on top of Aave, like very similar to like Ethereum.org. And like I could be wrong about this, but in 10 years, if BarnBridge is successful, I actually think that BarnBridge will look more like Ethereum.org, meaning like it's not necessarily where people go to directly interact with an application. It's where application developers go and figure out how to plug into BarnBridge. Like now we're not going to take down the interface and put up ethereum.org or anything like that. I'm more saying I think in 10 years, that's where this industry will go, that these protocols will have tons and tons and tons of interfaces and companies built into them. And so I've been working on getting external funding to essentially start a company called Q.xyz, uh, which I bought that domain name. It was like 13 grand, but I paid for it out of pocket. DAO didn't pay that. But basically, what we're going to do at Q is longer term, we're going to take like grants from DAOs to essentially build things into these protocols. So like we're looking at a couple, and this is the area that I went and hired one of the head contract developers from JP Morgan to come on as like the CTO. And we're actually working through, I think Mike had asked before what happened with some of the money movement from the multi-sig, that it went to like a different places than it normally did. We haven't done anything with that. I just used the same multi-sig that like the community like cream hack stuff was. But we essentially moved that over where like a lot of the development in the very beginning is going to be like very specific to like BarnBridge, to the point where we actually may like long term have like a dedicated team in Q that only like does things for BarnBridge. But we're working through like a couple different ideas for things that we essentially want to work on. And like outside of that grant, like Q doesn't need to get compensated by BarnBridge anymore if like the community is not in support of it. But I think that when people see what we do with that 200 grand, I would assume that like they're going to want us to keep doing it. So we have like numerous different ideas that we're working through. One of them being like, and a lot of the community members on this call like know some of this stuff because I like send it to them privately, or maybe like Max would, like you talk directly with the team. It's not just like getting dropped in the main Discord. And so one idea that I had been fleshing out specifically with Mike and Max was around like how we could use uh, like Olympus liquidity to create some type of like smart alpha pro that treasuries could use. And that the reason that like I'm pushing to where the point that like Q can exist is that one, like if we end up having a KYC and AML and like the governments and regulatory agencies come down hard on DeFi, then we'll have the framework to actually, also none of this has been like announced, by the way, so like maybe don't like go tweet about all this stuff immediately, because we are going to put out like a formalized doc on what some of this stuff is. But basically, this concept around Smart Alpha Pro, would require like business development to actually like reach out to and like set up custom pools and things for a fee. Well, like that becomes a lot more difficult to do directly through a DAO. But if all the fees are essentially being generated back to Barnbridge at the protocol level, then I think that like that's like for usage of the protocol, then I think that's like essentially a net win. We're also working around some concepts. Like I met one of the Aave devs came out to um, my house through Pleaser DAO because they had a big like retreat out here in the mountains of Puerto Rico. Also, just as a heads up, like through Metaverso, and then like the InterDAO people coming out here, like the Universe people, like Pleaser DAO, like some of the projects that I've like done seed rounds for and kind of helped like put together and push them to go DAO first. Like we're not the only DAO that is having these problems, and I think like as an industry, like things are getting fixed, but they're getting fixed slowly. Like we thought it was going to be DAO summer, and then I just went and created a bunch of DAOs and tried to push it so it did happen. Because I think like the net aggregate of all these DAOs building on our DAO tech is going to open up things like integrations into um, things that will bring like better transparency to the ecosystem, like coordinate. But like none of those things are like working or built out yet. Like a lot of the DAO infrastructure stuff that I think that we need for this to function the way the community like wants and expects it to. I mm, I probably thought that a lot of that development was going to happen quicker in the industry than it did, but I do know that it's coming. Like I'm working with very large like VCs and like they like even like True Ventures and groups will he's like one of the top 100 VCs in the world. Like they'll reach out to me about like crypto investments, and so does like Morgan Creek. So I mean even like Dan Loeb from Third Point, like I taught them how to use like DeFi. So like they people in the industry will reach out to me because I've become like known as this like DAO person. And so I really like will look at a lot of the DAO infrastructure stuff that's coming out, and I think that it's coming. And then even within projects like InterDAO and like there's a project called Refi Finance is trying to build the ability for like our specific DAO to select types of like collateral that the DAO is open to be the counterparty of, like via governance votes. And then InterDAO is like doing some really cool things with our DAO for governance. So I think like one way or another, like through kind of both of these things with like there's probably 10 DAOs building on our DAO, and some one of them I found out about the other day. I like was just looking at um, I was actually seeing I was trying to look at their code to see if their DAO was any different than ours because their interface was the same, and like they had like the barn staking contract and all the BB like calls. So like it's kind of working in terms of like it's growing bigger than what even Barnbridge was. And let's say next year there's 30 DAOs building on Barnbridge, right? Like some of that innovation is going to come from the industry that we can fork in the same way that they kind of forked our entire DAO, right? And so that's the net benefit of it being open source and allowing a lot of people to build into that, right? Like if someone forks Smart Yield, I'd be like, fuck you. But forking our DAO is actually net benefit for our entire like our eco, I guess, of like DAOs building it like around Barnbridge or directly attached to some of the people that were a part of it. So that's just like a quick heads up that like I hear everybody's concerns. I have concerns as well, at least in terms of like I share the same concerns. Like I think there needs to be more transparency in DAOs. I think these DAOs need to be building more tech that provides more utility into the token. The flip side is we need to get a product out that has product market fit, because otherwise we're just building a bunch of cool governance features to govern a protocol that like not that many people are using. And that's just kind of like the spiel about like DAOs is like that's not lost on me. And like I feel like it's like someone asked me the other day, like, where's half my time go? It's like, I mean, most of my time is still on Barnbridge, but a lot of my time is also just working with the industry on like DAOs because I somehow was because I named it DAO first, but like Troy and Kane were the ones that made it up. But I've become like elected as this like DAO expert, and so I am doing a lot of that, not just for Barnbridge, but for the whole ecosystem. And then getting back to what I was saying specifically about Q, and then I'll get off my soapbox. Vitalik, you gotta mute yourself. I don't know how to mute someone. He did it anyway. I figured it out. Okay, the other thing that I was gonna say is just like alpha about Q, is we're also looking at where I had this. Oh, okay, so I was talking about Pleaser DAO, and then I wanted to tell y'all that like we're not the only ones. Even though Pleaser DAO is just like a multi-sig that buys art, like it's trying to build Tekken, and they're having some of the same like coordination problems. But I think at scale, basically, like I'm friends with this. Well, I shouldn't say his name. This guy named Fully Allocated that's working on default, and that's like how I got to know Zeus from Olympus really well. Is like they are trying to build ways that like kind of like what we it's like what we did with Squad DAO, but on steroids, where like there's like certain teams working. Like I'll explain how it would like kind of work with BarnBridge if this tech existed. Like Smart Alpha has its like own team that can like self-organize, and they can signal to each other within the group like who's helping and who's not. Smart Yield would have its own, like Sailor would have its own. And then through the DAO, we can like start incentivizing teams to do things, and they can kind of signal to each other like this guy's like the guy at the project in college that didn't do shit, but he got A's because the other three kids were like hardworking nerds that skip parties. Well, like there's ways to start to coordinate those things through DAOs. Maybe not on the maybe the coordination layer will go to like a layer two that's more gas efficient because you're talking about a lot of transactions. But like this type of thing would be like something that like I would propose that we implement inside of BarnBridge tomorrow, and literally just put the entire like multi-sig into if it existed properly. The problem is like I've talked to teams that use Coordinate, and it doesn't do that yet, right? Like that's a very ambitious like goal. But I've seen like some of the VCs that I've been talking to have said that even like Google and like uh, like devs from Google that were like executives are like leaving Google to get VC funding to build like DAO tooling, and like that is a huge part of like what Silicon Valley is investing in right now. So something's going to come out of that that's going to be able to help us, along with things at the protocol level that we can start doing that drive more utility back to the bond token. And I don't necessarily even think that all that has to be like innovated directly from us, because like if refi finance builds that collateralization from our DAO, where the DAO vote decides what they accept as collateral, well, we could start to do that as well, where like we would be like counterparty to certain smart alpha pools. We could be counterparties to certain like smart yield pools. Like it, I'm not saying that we do that. I'm just saying that it opens up the opportunity for us, and like that's not code that we had to write or pay for. But again, like it's something that we can essentially implement because it's open source. And getting back to that's that whole kind of soapbox. But getting back to Q in specific, where I was saying that one of the Aave devs was out here via Pleaser DAO. It's one of their core team members, not like Stani is. Uh, um, I don't know how much code he's writing for Aave at this point anymore. I think he's probably managing a lot of stuff. So when you interact with the coders, you get like a lot of alpha, but also you get like a sentiment on like this isn't getting pushed down through Stani or like an investor would be able to stop this. It's more like their excitement about like finding partners and groups to build into. And I talked to him like in depth about BarnBridge and some of the ideas that I thought that we could build into Aave. And so since I have Q and we have the original grant just to prove out that this is actually going to work and be good for BarnBridge, I think we haven't decided 100% on the first product that we're going to build, because we also have to build like really in deep like wallet integrations, and we've just been working on like infrastructure of like how the system's set up, like so there's no cardinal sends and the thing can scale. We've even talked to like some of the major centralized exchanges and larger groups in the United States to try to figure out like how they're working on DeFi, like so that we can get access to like their SDKs and APIs, so that when they want to plug into BarnBridge, they can just go through Q. Because like right now, like they're doing the compounds and Aves of the world, but they want to move downstream and get into riskier protocols. And like honestly, the people that know how to build that type of stuff, they are building protocols. So there's a lot of like unfilled development roles in some of these bigger uh, centralized companies that, but again, they have tons and tons of users that uh, kind of puts DeFi to shame. Like if you collect up all the major centralized exchanges, they have more users. So you're talking about millions and millions of users. But yeah, they don't really have a reasonable way to enter into DeFi. So us building in a way that we understand their tech stack and it makes it very easy for them to plug in, um, that's a huge win for BarnBridge because we're just going to essentially make it very easy for them. And it's still up to them and their bureaucracies on the risk that they determine. But the fact that BarnBridge has been built by a good team, like with people that they trust, and I know executives at all of these companies, it's a little bit less risky than if they were to go plug into like Cream, for instance, or something that's completely anonymous. So that is something that we have like going for us that I think is a win on like the Q side. But then specifically, one of the products that I'm really opting for is, aside from like Smart Yield V2, just essentially taking um, like opening up the borrowing power of Smart Yield V1 and integrating into like Aave on some type of a layer two that essentially allows you to go after like arbitrage opportunities of stablecoin mispricings where you can essentially build lever loops. So like so long as there's stablecoins that like you're willing to like say like okay I'll take counterparty risk of Tether or GUSD essentially being in the GUSD being in the like I'm down to hold Tether as part of the lever loop for like a week long period or something like that. Well, then you basically find like mispricings between. It's more complicated than this, but this is the easiest way to understand it. Because we've done some clever stuff in the middle that I think everyone will explain, we'll learn more about later. We're just more trying to figure out if it's like technically possible to do this. But yeah, basically we'll find like a mispricing between Tether and USDC, and it will lock in like a fixed rate, create like a week long lever loop, and you're essentially at that point always getting a higher interest rate than what you would get directly depositing on Aave. And so I think that that will drastically increase like our usage. I think it will also, like, we're not competing with Aave at that point because we're still driving a lot of TVL to them as well, and they collect those fees. The issue is you're talking about a massive amount of gas fees. Like when I, in a high gas fee environment, one time deposited into Smart Alpha or Smart Yield uh, Senior, it was like $700, right? And so $700 deposit, $700 withdrawal, that's $1,400 at a 5% interest rate. You're talking about millions of dollars that need to get deposited that the fees don't just eat the interest you would have earned anyway on like a month-long deposit. And so I think that Smart Yield V1 has a lot of things that we could just build into it on a layer two, whether it's Polygon, we're really looking at Polygon, Avalanche, and Optimism, but figuring out which one's like the cheapest one so that we can build like really cool products on top of BarnBridge with the already existing contracts. And like, yeah, it's going to be on a website called Q and not BarnBridge, but like the fees accrue back to BarnBridge in the exact same way. And in this scenario, we'd actually have to deploy contracts and like the DAO would um, be in control of them, right? Because we're not, Q's never going to be a DAO. So it shouldn't be in control of governing contracts. So like whatever contracts we edit, the DAO can either uh, choose to completely ignore them or it can pay attention to them. Similar to what I did with BondBet. Like I don't need anybody's like permission to go and deploy like something that is governed by BarnBridge, but like if the BarnBridge community like doesn't like it, then they just never vote there, and then it's a dead protocol. But if it is successful, then it's 100% like still controlled at the protocol level by BarnBridge. And then there will just be like generalized DeFi usage. I think if we can build like a way more degenerate version of InstaDApp and Zapper that do far deeper integrations between protocols. This is something I've been thinking about for years, is like, or at least a year and a half, like that synth bridge concept that I had. That never really got built because it's kind of more of a company and an interface, and we couldn't figure out like which team accrued more value out of it and kind of who would kind of run it and make the decisions, who's going to design it. Um, and so we thought about doing like a dual grant, but it just kind of got to the point that we were like, this really isn't like a protocol. This is an interface that like utilizes these two protocols and has some permissionless smart contracts to make it work. But yeah, it, and plus another reason we didn't is because also SynthBridge really wouldn't work because of all the fees would eat into it. So we kind of needed optimism because that's what synthetics married itself to. So this has been something I've been thinking about doing for over a year, but one of the big motivations in doing this, like, I mean, part of it is I'm taking money externally. So like we don't have to actually worry about, sorry, my dogs are fighting. We don't have to worry about Barnbridge like paying for this outside of like the initial grant just to prove to everybody that it works. But I'm actually getting funding from like much larger VCs that are going to be um, paying for this. So like the Barnbridge like actual budget will drop substantially because the dev team is going to be on it at that point. Um, so that will drastically like extend our runway. So there's a lot of like benefits to what we're doing here, and it's like something I've been working on for a long time and trying to figure out what it is and setting up all the legal structures and working with VCs for funding. But naturally, like at a minimum for the first 3 months, like the only thing that we're going to be working on is Barnbridge. And then I would say that the next obvious step is going to be Barnbridge to fiat type, like more in-depth integrations that neither core team like has the time for, and it's a lot more interface work. And then from there, I'm not 100% sure like what protocol 3 would be, but like with Barnbridge and Fiat being the earlier ones, I think that naturally we'll always have a lot of work there and things to focus on. But the number one reason that I'm also doing this is to start showing the community. I want like, because like I did, like we went and started these DAOs and like I made up the word DAO first. Like, I don't think I've ever really explained like the way that like me and Troy and some of these people think about this stuff and like how people can kind of go raise their hand and get funding. But like, even like Max came up with this concept like Money Penny, like it's not even like, I want the lines to be blurred between like core team, Barnbridge core, founder, like dev team, DMob, another dev team that could work on this, like Q. It's more like if someone has like the technical chops to like deliver something like soup to nuts, like back end smart contracts, front end, like we get good groups to actually audit the code and look at it. Like there's no reason that we even need to necessarily be prioritizing like one thing over another, where the DAO could actually contract with groups to actually start building things. And some of that is like in a box because of the multi-sig. And I think in retrospect, I wish the multi-sig had not been, I didn't know when we asked for X% of the supply or whatever it ended up being, that like it was going to be that valuable for all those OTC deals. That was really supposed to be like a short-term thing. And then I just like, it just, there was a lot there, right? So it extended runways substantially, but like I don't want to wait 3 to 5 years before we start like implementing features that actually make the Barnbridge DAO function like a DAO. And so I don't think we're like there yet, but I do want to start creating more transparency. And I think through Q and like other efforts I do can start showing the community how like they can bring things to the table, like get compensated, and it like it doesn't always have to like go directly through, like it's not supposed to be my decision. That was like what I tried to give away. but now it is the multi-sig's decision on a lot of this stuff. But like, it doesn't really have to be, right? Like, no one owns more than 4% of the BarnBridge supply. Nobody can truly block someone getting a grant directly from the DAO. And I think we can start doing some of this stuff more loosely, where if people do raise their hand. But specifically to Q, if I can show people you can build companies on top of these DAOs, you don't have to, and it's mostly interface and React work. Once the smart contracts are there, then anyone can go out and start doing these types of things. Like, if, like, let's say Q does terribly because there's 80 other companies building on top of BarnBridge, like, whatever. Like, I'm good at that point. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing in 2022 is showing people, even though um, like I won't directly be like compensated through like BarnBridge. I very much like care about BarnBridge. And so like I'm gonna focus on kind of showing the ecosystem of like, no, in the past you start a foundation and then you go start a DAO and the foundation always kind of has control. Well, that really still is not even the case right now with BarnBridge. Like there could be another group that could come in and start asking for stuff and building faster, and we wouldn't even have the power to stop it, and I wouldn't. But I want to kind of start showing people like maybe talking more about DAOs and some of the pain points other people like DAOs in the ecosystem are having, and the way that we've kind of thought through like talking about this incessantly over the past year and a half, like especially me and Troy, is I think that the original ICOs had this backwards where they started a company that was a foundation and then kind of were forced into creating a DAO, like in Uniswap's situation or a governance token. I think that the real way that we should be doing it is creating DAOs, building protocols, getting communities there, and then you can build companies on top of those protocols that can either be wholly funded outside of them or partly subsidized by the DAOs and the treasuries themselves. And I think that's a much more sustainable model to getting to the point where you have a lot of users because they can build like very unique things into it. Like even now, if BarnBridge was on a layer two and this gas problem I talked about earlier about the smart yield senior side, uh, you could build like some type of a mobile app that was like a like CD competitor. It's like you basically target on Facebook people that have like CDs, and they, instead of doing a 3 month CD at a bank for 0.5%, they do a 3% CD. But like BarnBridge can't like even have a mobile app. Like you have to have a company to launch a mobile app through Apple. You have to have a company to run corporate ads through Facebook. Um, but literally, you don't even have to call it BarnBridge. You could just call it like CD5. That's not what you'd want to call it, but like a CD DeFi product that was a mobile app. And I'm not saying it would be successful. I'm just kind of giving you examples of like different ways these things can start to plug in where BarnBridge exists as a protocol. And then there's all these other companies and user interfaces that plug into it and compete for the various interest rates and usage on the platform. And that gives us a lot more autonomy legally and from a regulatory standpoint, because then you can call it a CD and you can basically KYC and AML people on the way in. And I've started to see that with some of the stuff InstaDApp and Zapper are doing, but if, you know, Coinbase, InstaDApp, and Zapper are basically power all of DeFi, then it was kind of pointless in the first place. So I think the opportunity to start building smaller or even larger companies on top of a lot of these protocols is, I mean, not only do I think it will be lucrative, but I think it will also be extremely good for BarnBridge. And I think it will signal to a lot of other people in the industry that this is a natural progression that's a good thing, because the company cannot make changes at the protocol level without going through the DAO. And again, if they want governance, then they have to acquire it. So that's kind of my TED talk to open this up, but it's kind of more of a response of an update on things that I haven't shared with the community, and also just kind of reading some of the questions so that everyone can kind of understand some of the directions that I'm at least going on things, and like some of my reasoning, since like even with fiat, I think nobody really like understood why that got rolled out the way it is. And maybe if I was doing these more often, I could have gotten like feedback and known like what everyone thought. I just kind of unilaterally made that move because I knew Max really wanted to work on it, and I wanted him building close to Barnbridge. Um, Same with Johannes and Daniel, Luca, and Nils, since like App Park got broken up. But yeah, I mean that's kind of a super transparent like summary of where my head's at, and I don't think I like left anything major out, but there's probably more stuff that we can continue to talk about in the coming weeks that I think will become like more and more apparent, I guess. Shit. I just hit my e-cig and started coughing. Does anybody like have questions about that, or like just general feedback or any major questions they want answered? I know that was a lot of information.
Hey, Tyler, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned KYC just a minute ago. Are there some solutions already out there that you're thinking are going to be incorporated, or is that still a need for development for the type of app or solution you were just talking about before?
Okay, so I was just using that as an example. Like right now, you don't have to KYC and AML to use DeFi, and like I was actually like extremely like excited when I saw like Janet Yellen's like recommendation to the Financial Action Task Force recently, where she was saying like things that are like non-custodial, like very much like protocols, like don't necessarily like need to fall under the bucket of KYC. And she also clarified that like people like individual devs on a protocol are not like value added service providers. So like she actually surprisingly recommended like extremely good stuff for DeFi. The example was like if we had to KYC and AML, like literally Barnbridge cannot do that. Like it doesn't have a company. Like there isn't any like way to actually implement that unless a KYC provider like started accepting direct DAO deposits, which I don't even know how that would legally work. So because like a DAO, the token of Barnbridge, its purpose is to govern the DAO, and we have years to build utility into it. Sorry, the DAO, the token powers the DAO, but the DAO powers the protocol, right? So like the point of it is that these decisions that get made actually enact changes like on the protocol at the protocol level. Like that was one reason that we built with like the diamond standard. The DAO can't like necessarily like force the front end provider of Barnbridge to actually host KYC and AML. Like it's, or what if the DAO said no, right? Then like who's liable? So in that scenario, if they were to do that, then yeah, you have companies that are essentially building on top of these things. Like another thing I've worked on a lot, and this is a big part of why that all of us did Universe, was I have been thinking about like how could a DAO power a front end interface, and like we looked into Filecoin, we looked into Definity. We're still trying to figure some of that stuff out, but like it was such a small use case of like an attack vector that I mean it was going to cost like a ton of money, so like it needed to be like a separate fundraise. Because if I had gone to the community and been like, yo, I need $5 million to do a bunch of research on how DAOs can power front end interfaces and like why, like I think everyone would have said what Kane said, is like that's not on my like high list of what I'd be worried about. But then naturally, that is what we've started to see, is like Uniswap has had to take things off of their interface, and they have the power to do that because that they cannot take it down at the protocol level. You can still go plug into those smart contracts and trade with them, but whoever is running that interface like has risk, right? So it may hit a point where like different countries have different apps that interact with DeFi and have their different rules. Um, but once that protocol is on Ethereum mainnet, Like so long as there's liquidity there, no one can take it down. But there are other places they can do
I
it.
know
So
you're
like
busy. We'll talk
in
later.
the scenario, and I'm just more talking broadly here, not like giving any specific examples, but like specific to Barnbridge, an example would be if we had to do that, there literally is no legal framework for us to do that. So like I want to create a company that can build things into Barnbridge, and if that ends up being the main interface that is utilized, that's probably due to um, either just being a badass user experience. We have a bunch of users everywhere else, and a lot of them are plugging into Barnbridge, which we'll prioritize because it'll always be my baby. Like that's a win for us, right? Or if there's some regulatory thing that comes out that we have to implement something like this, then yeah, it's there, it's built, and we can use it across a lot of DeFi. Or then even just to the point of getting some of these large organizations to recognize how our like SDK and API works. Like literally, if a major KEX came to us right now and wanted to plug directly into Barnbridge, we'd have to stop building Sailor and then focus on that. And like, who knows the timelines? So this gives me a little more autonomy to customize the user experience of using Barnbridge, as well as trying to cater to some of these like bigger groups. And then even some of the really big groups, like I said, I've talked to like Dan Loeb and tried to teach him a lot about DeFi. Like they won't use anything unless like Coinbase custody plugs directly into it. And I don't think they really plug into anything other than like SNX staking. Like as some of these larger groups, like groups that use Fireblocks to plug in, they really can't even use Barnbridge in its current state. They can kind of only use Aave and Compound because that's what like Fireblocks has focused their development on. But if we can build these integrations and then kind of open source how you plug into all of it, then it makes it drastically easy for larger organizations to come in and work with us. And it also lets us move a little bit faster while these large bulk protocols are getting built. We can intake feedback and like have a place to like utilize like those features, because again, a lot of it's front end work. But I answered like way more of your question than you asked, so maybe I should make sure I actually answered your question.
No, no, that's great. Appreciate it. I think what you said there was, in essence, somebody could start a company that they want to be above the board on focusing on U.S. business, let's say, and they want to put out a CD product where they're going to KYC their customers. And I think what you're saying is behind the scenes, that company can then integrate directly with BarnBridge to actually generate the 3% yield they want to offer for their CD. But the company that gets established and is running that DApp in the middle is assuming all of the KYC risk and needs to handle all that procedure themselves. And then you're, in essence, insulated from all of that occurring. Is that the right way to think about it?
Sort of. So yes, for most of it, I'm gonna split it in half because the idea of the CD app, like concept, um, that is like already possible. Like someone could literally go build that app tomorrow. That was just an example of like a different company than Q that someone could essentially do. Like we may build that functionality into Q if we get a lot of like kind of normie retail users. But I'm just saying like an app that only wants to do that, like they could do that right now and plug into Barnbridge. And be a way that those users can actually get that type of yield. Like they don't even need to know that Barnbridge is running on the back end. Like I think that it would require us being having a lot of liquidity on a layer two, which is something again that I'm talking with Aave about, and like I think through some of the stuff with Q that we'll be able to work on building that out. But like that's just a completely different concept than Q. It's just an example of like another company that you could build into Barnbridge, and like you don't need Barnbridge's permission. It can never revoke access. It can never stop you from using it. It can't stop. It can't pick via the APIs and SDKs. Like literally anything can plug into those contracts. Um, Unless, I mean, the DAO could vote to change the parameters, but they have to give the same parameters to everyone. Like 80 companies could plug into the same current thing. What we're kind of doing is we're more on the Q side. It's completely different than that idea. We're building very customized user experiences, starting with BarnBridge, but more so like protocol level integrations. Like if you were essentially going to like integrate something a little more advanced than what you can do on like perfect examples, like I don't think the average person knows like on the BarnBridge site that you can borrow against your bond on Rari right now. Like it's not on the BarnBridge site that you can do all of the Olympus stuff, because it's like, does Olympus makes fees off that, Rari makes fees off of that. Do we put things on that interface that compete directly with like the current products, right? Or where do you end up putting them? So like these types of things, that those are super low level, like protocol level integrations, but like deeper protocol integrations where you're actually taking a function of one protocol and then essentially integrating it with like directly with another protocol to create a completely new function that doesn't exist in the market. No one's really doing that in DeFi. Like Zapper's doing it a little bit, Instadapp's doing it a little bit, but they're not building them in this extremely deep, like intimate capacity. They're really just very high level. This is an interface that you can stake on Compound, you can stake on Aave. You can kind of do all the same stuff you can do on Aave. They're just aggregating it into one interface. What I want to do through Q is I want to build like much deeper integrations in between these two permissionless protocols that you can use our interface to do very different stuff than what you can do directly on like barnbridge.com or directly only using BarnBridge's smart contracts. And so that's an area that I don't think anyone's focusing on in the industry. And because BarnBridge is a much more complicated to understand protocol, I think that simplifying the user experience of the things that you could do with it, I think that at that point you're talking about a completely separate interface, and like I said, it kind of needs to be a company because there's no protocol that it's powering. The DAO, let's say that I build like this lever loop concept with Aave, like this company cannot control Aave or BarnBridge, right? So if there's no protocol that it's covering and then it's just an interface, then yeah, that at that point that's a company. That's no longer a protocol. It's just an app.
It's fascinating, man. There's a lot of possibilities there. Thanks for the answer.
Yeah, for sure. But it does open up a lot of like autonomy for what we can build. And yeah, BarnBridge is going to be like front and center for that because like I understand BarnBridge by far the most of any DeFi protocol in the world. And so I know the things that can be built into it. And yeah, I mean, there's just some limitations at times of, it's honestly a lot like legality. Like the regulatory bodies need to like, they still kind of need to give more clarity, but operating, I mean, in a perfect world, a DAO is allowed to run an interface, but like the tech just isn't 100% there yet. So I think that in the meantime, if we want to build these awesome user experiences, plus even if the DAO could run an interface, right? Like if the DAO could run an interface, why can't other companies then plug into that technology? Like you don't want barnbridge.com to be the only interface that is powering the usage of the platform. You want like, well, I mean, maybe some people do. I think it's dumb. I'd rather have 100 companies plug into BarnBridge and barnbridge.com be an informational site than have barnbridge.com be like this super powered app that takes over everything, because I think that's like unrealistic. I think there's too much competition in financial sector that there's never going to be one ring to rule them all in DeFi. And so if you extrapolate that then and you say, I don't believe that there's going to ever be a superpower interface that powers all of DeFi. I think it will be fragmented, and there won't be one interface that plugs into BarnBridge. There will be multiple ones. Then you can kind of extrapolate that to say then, okay, well, since there's not just BarnBridge isn't going to be the superpower app that does everything, well, then, okay, then I want 100 or I want 1,000 or I want 100,000 companies plugged into BarnBridge. So that's more the rationale or like logic that I'm thinking about and how I'm thinking through that.
Sounds a lot like the Fidelity model in the TradFi world, right? You know, they have their own interface. They also serve as the back end for hundreds of RIAs and other financial firms that are doing TradFi investments.
But that's kind of what the base layer DeFi is going to be. That's one reason that I always like, that's why I don't like completely respect like Suzu's like take on synthetics is like, I think the best synthetic assets are going to be, they're going to want to be on the most secured, like base layered network, or through some type of like optimistic thing. But like synthetics is going to be more successful if synthetics has a ton of companies integrating with its operating system. The difference with DeFi is that it rips out Fidelity needing that backend or people needing to license it directly from them or needing their permission. Like what DeFi does is it rips all of that out and it says, no, this is now the backend layer of all of like this is the guts of the financial system, and then everyone else can plug into this basically. um, that's one of the big powers of it. So like BarnBridge is still the guts that will power all of the things. Like it still is like, well, maybe with Element with all like the incentives and the Lau brothers just like dumping a ton of money on it. I guess Element is the largest like fixed income protocol at this point, but BarnBridge definitely was and is like the best built, like longest standing fixed income product. And yeah, there's not product market fit for a lot of reasons, like gas fees, other reasons. But once that gets streamlined, it's hard to believe that there's not going to be old world like financial intermediaries like extrapolated 5 years out that aren't going to respect those contracts like that have never been hacked. And since you can't take Smart Yield V1 in its current state off of Ethereum ever, like someone could literally go plug into Smart Yield V1 and that becomes more successful than Smart Yield V2. And it's not, Smart Yield V1 isn't even on our interface anymore. It's just literally someone else plugged into that one. What I want to do with Smart Yield V1 would actually require deploying new contracts, but it's not like extremely different. So basically, all these DeFi protocols long term, you'll need informational sites on how to find these types of things and how to deploy contracts to them, which is going to require a lot of like documentation and information. And since we were the first like truly DAO first organization, I think I'm just taking the natural next step to see how hard it is to integrate into these types of things and get a head start on knowing like, okay, we need documentation for this, we need documentation for that. Like, so I'm kind of conflating two concepts here. One is just anyone can plug into BarnBridge. Like you don't need to go through Q in order to do that. That would be kind of fucked up if I even had that power or like took it. More what I'm saying is that I want to build stuff that integrates BarnBridge into other protocols, and I want to make the SDKs and APIs structured in a way that much larger companies can plug into them. Um, but that's not really taking away anything from BarnBridge. Like BarnBridge basically will just operate the same way that it does in terms of how it makes fees from these transactions. But someone else could build their own SDK and API and plugin. They don't have to use the ones that we work off of. In fact, I think in most cases, they will just build their own. But right now, what I'm saying is we've been talking to some of the larger American centralized groups to figure out how they're structuring their apps like under NDA so that we know that we're structuring in a way that they can plug into, because I think they would be the first larger groups to actually use something like this. But if someone's building an app from scratch, they can plug into BarnBridge on their own SDK and API, and that CTO can determine how he wants to do it. So we're not like, there's not going to be a monopoly or a way that we determine who's allowed to plug in, because it's kind of the whole point of DeFi and these protocols in the first place, is that anyone can plug in. You don't need Fidelity's permission. You don't need Tyler's permission. You don't even need the DAO's permission. They're permissionless. Anyone can plug into them and get the same equal rights of access as anyone else.
Makes sense. Thanks for talking that through. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, I don't know if you can talk or it would dox you, like, but I don't know if you have like specific questions because I know I just gave like a lot of information and I haven't even told some of the people that DM me, like Aaron, Dana, and Mike, and uh, Sir Link Rich. I'm just thinking, like, basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is I say some things in DMs to people that I don't just drop in the public chat. Um, and so I don't know if like Aaron, well, I don't know. I should go in the AMA, I guess. I forgot to start. Never mind. Why can't I hear? I'm hearing there are a lot of ways to build on top of BarnBridge, but I also think BarnBridge itself should have tools that it provides more utility directly from a web app. For example, should leveraging smart alpha positions be a part of BarnBridge itself, or should it be the job of an external platform like Abracadabra or Aave? How do we decide what our features are? This is a great question, actually. So first of all, I would assume that if something is extremely successful on Q, I mean, we can just add it to the BarnBridge unit. Like, it's hard to argue with like this is working, right? In terms of, let's like separate this out. So there's an interface. Sure, it can be Q. If we build something completely dope and it's a feature, then like I'll put in a pull request to BarnBridge, right? Like, and we can merge that feature into the interface. Because it's like Q's function is not just going to be BarnBridge. It's going to be where you can go to use a lot of like different tools and features. But yeah, if one really blows up, I think we would be like extremely stupid not to integrate it. And so the answer to that is like yes. But if anything, it's more of like a DeFi, like degenerate jungle gym where we can go off and tinker with things without like them having to affect like the user experience of BarnBridge per se. The second part of your question about smart alpha positions, being able to leverage them. So this is like a point of, I don't want to say contention or frustration is probably the wrong word. This is a point of like extreme interest and like not sure how exactly we do this, but I think we need to, right? Because one of the largest user of Smart Alpha is the second largest liquid digital asset fund. There's literally people shooting fireworks off at my house. Yeah, I'm gonna turn my thing on. Video chat isn't available. There's people shooting fireworks off outside. I live in this like really peaceful area of Puerto Rico up in the mountains. Like I've just never seen people shoot off fireworks like outside my mountain. I didn't even know there was a house there. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying. So yeah, I mean, I think the second largest liquid digital asset fund in the world is the largest user of Smart Alpha. And we've taken in a lot of feedback from them through the usage and like things that we should add to it. They sent me a ton of stuff about wrap stake and actually using Smart Alpha. They said that like where they think that it's like superior to perps is like for things that actually generate revenue, like inherently, like a USDC position type thing, if that wasn't a stable coin, or something like the staked ohm positions or like staked ETH positions. They think that anything that's like inherently cash flowing inside of uh, Smart Alpha allows you to do things that are extremely like creative. And so I think we should listen to them and create. I talked to Lido or Lido, I don't know which name is. And our next step with them, I didn't even tell Christian this actually. I had a call with their head of business development because he used to work with me at Token Foundry and Consensus, and we want to focus like in January on trying to introduce not just like the ETH one, but like why wouldn't you just use staked ETH that you actually can get cash flow from inside of the smart alpha position? And then I would actually say Ohm, exact same thing. I think Pablo has a proposal for something like that going out next week. And that's just for, like, that's also like I've seen people in the community talk about this. I lurk in the Discord, like I don't just ignore it. I read everything. I just don't respond as much as I used to. So like I know that those features are going to be like those things are going to be asked for. The lending part is the other component. So like I said this on the last call, like separating out, like when I said hedge fund, I literally mean like their job is to manage like liquid digital assets. They have a VC fund attached to it, but the hedge fund people, the users of it, are the ones that reached out to us about Smart Alpha, and then they wanted to do like a $3 million OTC deal, and we didn't even have that in the multi-sig. So like it was a lot smaller, but they use it like all the time. But that's a way better thing than a VC fund coming in, because the VC fund, like everything's, at least when everything was blowing up in crypto, like you could only get, like they weren't using the products, they just invested in it. But like Parify, for instance, they have a VC fund, but attached to that VC fund is the largest stablecoin fund in the world. And then the largest liquid digital asset fund is whatever Olaf's company's called, Polychain maybe. And they like know us all through like the universe ecosystem. I just haven't brought any of this stuff to Polychain because I want us to kind of fix and introduce some of the things that number two is asking us for. And I'm not saying their name because they invested in Saffron and they like don't want to be like disclosed, but like long story short is it's not that secret. Like they're kind of public about it now, but they didn't invest because of smart yield. They invested in like smart alpha essentially. And the number one thing that they want to actually have us do, other than these kind of wrap stake ohm concepts or like Lido ETH positions that yield as opposed to being stagnant, which I think is really interesting. Like I can consolidate and share with the industry what this god level brain hedge fund manager wants to do with it, because I think it's good for everyone to know. But the bigger component is the ability to borrow against the smart alpha senior and junior positions, because they think that it opens up the opportunity for long tail assets, which basically there's a lot of groups and funds that are sitting on massive bags, right? Like they're essentially sitting on huge bags. Now, what I question about this is, okay, but does that just mean that you're going to borrow against the smart alpha senior position and then never pay it back? And you just act like you're now our protocol is a counterparty to exit liquidity, like Aave was for a bunch of Chainlink holders. That brings a lot of risk onto the platform. So how do we do this in a way that we either offboard it to another group? The problem then is if we do it with Rari, we have to find a way to incentivize that, or we have to find a counterparty to that. In like stables, for instance, if it's Aave, like we couldn't even get bond listed on Aave. Like imagine Arthur OX pushing through like like senior FDT positions, right? Like it's just not going to happen. So they may set up like permissionless pools like Rari has. Well, so, or we build our own custom protocol into that. That needs to be done by BarnBridge's core dev team, in my opinion, because that pretty much is going to require a deep understanding of how that works. And like we can't expect that Aave is going to build it for us, right? Like if we need leverage for these positions, we need to find a way to do it. The reason that I think like let's prioritize like Sailor first is some of these same groups that we've told about like that have asked us for this feature for Smart Alpha. They also are really excited about Sailor and want to use it to set up like um, basically private placement companies where they can go out and find the other side. Like I told Mark Yusko about it because he was calling me asking if you could use smart yield in some way that would allow him to build like a Sailor type bond for like Filecoin holders, because like there's a Filecoin holder that wants to like essentially like lend out their Filecoin, but they don't want to like lose access to it long term. Well, that's like a lot of what like Sailor does, and like the fact that El Salvador did it, I think, kind of legitimizes that there's demand for this, but there's also demand for this product at like the large hedge fund level. And then they almost become our syndicates. Like they go out and find the other side to those deals, and then use their broker dealers to just put into both sides or make custom old world like securities out of this permissionless protocol. But like being able to have like the ability to do it permissionlessly, I think that there's, from our market research over like the past 3 months, like I think there is, and I was honestly, admittedly, like extremely skeptical about Sailor and thought it was a stupid idea until I started, because I'm like, oh, this guy Michael Saylor did it, great. I didn't like realize these things were massively oversubscribed. A lot of funds like have other assets that they want to do these types of things with, and that there's an appetite for buyers on both sides. So we can kind of only go off of what other people are saying, but I will eat my crow and say like the product's not out yet. Who knows? Like, but I hope that I eat my crow and that the product is way more successful than my original gut instinct was towards it. But I don't really care about being right. Like I'll be wrong for the entire next year if it means BarnBridge is successful. So like I'm 100% here for it because there is a lot of excitement around it. But basically that whole thing around Smart Alpha and the ability to borrow against it, I think that that is also very, very important. I think it's complicated in a way that we need to make sure that we're not long tail assets counterparty risk, that we're stuck holding the bags of all these um, kind of protocols that we don't want senior positions, which again, that's where I was talking earlier about if the DAO could vote types of things that we would accept counterparty as collateral for, which I've talked this group Refi Finance into using our DAO. And then one of the Lime Chain devs is consulting on that project, which is how I found out about it. And George is like, I'm just going to write all these smart contracts because we want to use them for InterDAO for like on-chain mortgage stuff, or like we could use them at Universe to like get into like NFT borrowing and lending type stuff. But basically, if that exists, I think we could open up the ability to borrow against Smart Alpha positions. But we would probably need to do it with like some type of portion of our treasury that we act as counterparty to, or for each one of these assets, we have to go set up a permissionless pool and then find a counterparty to it. I just feel like there's not going to be any liquidity there. Like, it's like, oh, cool, I can borrow against my senior FDT position, but like I can borrow $1,000 against it because nobody even knows what the fuck this is. Like, that's like just how it's going to extrapolate. So it's not that like we're not thinking. That's why I said like frustrated is more like I feel like I've vocalized a lot like how important this is, but then I've also kind of come down to I don't think it's like easy either for reasons that people aren't even really thinking about. Like more from the perspective of like who is the counterparty in this scenario, because Aave is not going to be, and like who builds this if Aave isn't going to build it into us. And if we just use Rari, then what, our DAO is the counterparty, or we just set up a bunch of pools and there is no counterparty? So it's a little more complicated than just saying we should build borrowing and lending into Smart Alpha. There's like a lot more shit to think about. And I'm not kind of pushing that back on y'all to say like it's too hard or anything like that. I'm just more kind of raising the problems, because if I had a solution, I would have written a spec and like proposed we built it one-to-one. And I don't think I've completely figured it out yet. If someone can help come up with a solution for something like that that's elegant, then I think we do it. Does that answer your? I don't know who asked that. That was actually one of the AMA things. But yeah, long story short is like I have not thought about that, and I know there's demand from that from very large groups. I just hold on. What is there someone at our house? Oh, it's a pizza person. Okay. Um. Yeah, like it's just the thing that's cool today is like lateralizes the entire platform. So you can essentially like if Aave goes down, it can infinitely print more tokens to like bring it back up to float. I don't know if that doesn't create a death loop if that ever happens, but that's how their tokenomics works. So they have to be very, very, very strict about like what types of assets that they whitelist on their platform, because when you use Aave, you're the counter like you're taking on counterparty risk to uh, mana in Decentraland, right? Like, so because you deposit Ethereum and you're borrowing USDC, if mana and Decentraland crash, you're still taking on that counterparty risk. And the compound works the same way, where you have to take on Augur's counterparty risk. That's one of the reasons that they didn't list us, so that they don't just list any kind of up and coming DeFi protocol, because their governance has to determine what their platform is willing to take on as counterparty risk. I've seen groups like Silo Finance and that Gigabrain Tyler Reynolds that used to run Google Payments. He's gotten a group of devs to work on the concept of when you sign on to something like Aave or a lending market, you can actually select what types of collateral that you're willing to accept counterparty risk to as a user. And then that automatically calculates your interest rate. We'll see if that exists, then the question is, are people going to accept senior FDT positions um, as as counterparties, basically? Are they willing to assume the risk of, are the collateral risk essentially? And so this may get fixed by itself in the industry. Maybe Silo will fix it. Silo is just a really complicated product to build, and I don't think it's going to work on base layer Ethereum. That's a lot of computations and calculations. But yeah, that's a really long answer about Smart Alpha lending, like lending against the senior positions. Is ultimately we have to find a counterparty. And if we can't find one, then we have to figure out in our tokenomics how the DAO will do that. Otherwise, there's not going to be any liquidity anywhere. Like right now, you can go borrow against your bond at 200 grand on Rari. But if I wanted to do it with $5 million, there's nowhere in the world I can do that. That's because there aren't enough people that have put money in there to act as the counterparty. I'm reading what you're writing as a response to this. If I'm being quiet, it's because I'm watching Answers It No Mike. Finding solutions to this, even if one exists, integrating it BarnBridge would be nice. Wouldn't the counterparty naturally form because the uneven tranches make the other side more rewarding? Not really, because yeah, like you're saying, maybe not. Not really, because that affects like the leverage on like the downs, like how much is stacked to one side or the other affects like the leverage of the junior position or the downside protection of the senior. that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's willing to lend to either one of those positions. And since they're split, I mean, honestly, I don't really think that you should be lending. I don't think we should be doing this on the junior side either way, in the same way that I'm working on seeing if you can utilize this in BarnBridge, where the like smart yield senior positions, well, they already integrate, like they already have borrowing power from Aave because we deposited stable. So the users just aren't like able to utilize that borrowing power. So like that can be turned on, but it really should only be turned on the senior side because the junior side already kind of exists as a levered position. So you open up attack vectors for just all the liquidity to get drained out of the system. So I think in both these scenarios, you're really only talking about, just like mathematically or financially, you'd really only want to do it on the senior positions of both, because the junior positions in both scenarios basically act as levered upside. Just in the smart alpha scenario, the leverage is from the inherent coin that rebalances each week on, and if it's like ETH BTC, then BTC is like the what you price it in, right? Like, so it's ETH priced in BTC, but that junior side is already a levered position. So like just by depositing into smart alpha junior or smart yield junior, you actually are kind of inherently already borrowing against something to lever your position up. You just can't tell in the interface that that's what's happening. But on the senior side, especially for smart yield, I mean, that's a big reason that like fiat should exist, is because like they are very safe positions, right? So, or you could just allow people to borrow directly out of their position and then you couldn't use it for fiat. But yeah, I think that both those, but the smart alpha side, I really want to focus from like a biz dev perspective on getting more pools out there and enabling more groups to, and we're kind of talking about doing something called Smart Alpha Pro that would work directly with bond treasuries, but like I feel like that belongs under Q, because like I want to build a biz dev team. Like that's like a service that we would provide. The DAO still takes a ton of the, I mean, that's why I didn't name it BarnBridge Labs, because I don't want people to think that this is directly representative of BarnBridge. Like, but yeah, basically the senior positions could be taken by DAOs, and then we would have to set up like custom pools, for instance. But borrowing again, I think that like that may drive more TVL right now than me going out and finding a bunch of counterparties for smart alpha senior positions. Like it's, I think some of that, I hope, similar to what I talked about DAOs earlier, some of it I hope will naturally happen through the progression of DeFi and DAOs, where we may not have to build that. So we waste 6 months building out an extremely complicated, like one-to-one lending protocol that doesn't even have that much, like for a base that doesn't have that much liquidity in it in the first place. I think if we get enough, like if we can get a bunch of users for smart alpha for long tail assets, then I think naturally that's going to start getting demanded, or maybe someone just builds a protocol that does it and then we don't have to do it, which I'm fine with us building it. I'm fine with someone else building it, so long as the functionality's there. Or us as a DAO can divert dev resources, and if our dev team is extremely busy, we can go out and find someone who has the technical chops to build it, and we give them a grant. But right now, like what, there's like 13 million, like $5 to $13 million oscillating on smart alpha. I don't know that you need to build a lending protocol for that much liquidity, because you have to split it in half in the first place. If that number goes to $300 million and we start having a lot of long tail assets and DAOs using this, then yeah, I think that at that point it lends credibility to who has the bandwidth to build this, who's building what, and it's important enough that we find someone to build it if nobody has the time to. No, the roadblock, okay, so you're saying it sounds like the main roadblock is, got it. So it sounds like the main issue roadblock right now is stopping borrowing against Smart Alpha is that the junior tranche wouldn't have enough liquidity if borrowing existed. That makes sense. I'm finding more liquidity for Smart Alpha would be much more helpful first. Yeah, so I'm not just talking on the junior tranche. I'm talking about on like the whole platform, like building smart contracts into something that has $5 to $13 million in it. Like we're never going to make the money to justify, and I don't think that that's a blocker. Like I don't think that's like the blocker of why people aren't using it. I think part of that has to do with marketing, and part of it has to do with setting up custom pools. Like people have requested pools. I think that us having a way that it's easier to deploy them. I've talked about even doing this somewhat in governance where like we don't have to go through a DAO vote every time, but like we could honor a snapshot in some interface that will deploy smart alpha pools. The bigger thing that I think that we're waiting on to open up a bunch of long tail assets actually is we have to look at the layer twos for every single one. So like Floki, which Aaron Dana wants, like, well, that's on BSC, and I think I could be wrong on that one. And that's where the deepest liquidity is. Like we need to make sure that the layer twos that we deploy these assets to, that we're deploying the smart alpha pool to where the deepest like liquidity is on those layer twos. And so part of me is kind of waiting to see what Optimism does because of the depth of liquidity on those Uniswap pools. Because Uniswap's going to incentivize the shit out of them, right? Like it's just obvious that that's what they've been focusing on. They're going to port liquidity over. But long story short is like if we go launch Floki on Optimism, there's 100 grand in that pool, then like the rebalancing costs for the slippage end up destroying everything. But the actual base smart alpha pools, like I really only think on base layer Ethereum that maybe Bitcoin and Ethereum should be there because it's like we were paying like $2,000 a week to rebalance these pools because of gas fees. The thing doesn't make $2,000 a week because there's only $5 million in it, right? So one of the reasons that we haven't been like rush launching smart alpha pools is I'm hesitant until we figure out which layer two we focus on. And I kind of think the market will have a lot of that figured out by February. Or I think we just pick one and do everything there. Like what we should be doing is not necessarily looking at, no offense, Aaron Dana, I love the enthusiasm, but I think what we should be doing is looking at what is the deepest liquidity pools on Polygon, meaning like where does Sushi have the deepest liquidity pools on Polygon? We should be listing those top 10 assets. Same with Optimism, same with Arbitrum, and then also running 6 of these at the same time, 6 different layer twos. Like there's all these like updates and things that you have to like keep up with, or they'll change a code repository. Like, yeah, it's one-click EVM compatible, but I think from a bandwidth perspective, I feel like in Q1 and Q2, this should be community decided. We should all decide in Q1 and Q2 two L2s that we really, really, really want to focus on for Smart Alpha. And we open up, like naturally, I would just think that the most traded coins on Uniswap and SushiSwap are going to be they're going to have the most appetite for Smart Alpha, which is why Wrap Stake Ohm is such a good idea, because it's literally I think it is the most traded coin on Sushi, right? So I think that should be, my opinion is that I think that should be the way that we think about it, is that we focus on just 2. And I think Optimism, after talking with Aave, Synthetics, and Uniswap, I think that they're going to be ready in February and March, and that's going to have the deepest liquidity in comparison to like Arbitrum. I'm really interested in the stuff AVAX is doing, but it's all stemmed by incentives. So when that dies, do we not just have these super deep pools built in and nobody's using it anymore? So the ones I'm most interested in right now are Optimism, not because I personally like love the tech more than Arbitrum or anything. It's more the network they have around it. They have the largest lending protocol incentivizing it. Synthetics are gigabrains, and then you also have the largest depth of liquidity in the entire ecosystem for trading is Uniswap. So if some of that ports to optimism and that's their focus and they incentivize it, then I think that we need to be paying very close attention to optimism. That has nothing to do with like any type of maximalism or whether I like one more than the other. It's just that's a business statement. And then on the other side, where I will bring up some maximalism and opinion, is that I think that Polygon has a very, very strong network effect, and I think long term optimistic rollups will all outright be beat by ZK rollups. And I think the best ZK rollup in the ecosystem was Hermes. So because Polygon already has the network effects and deep integrations of kind of being the first L2 or side chain that got traction, that never went anywhere, right? They raised billions of dollars and they're building. Like DraftKings is like working with Polygon. Now that shit isn't like as secure as Optimism. It doesn't adopt the base layer of Ethereum. But when they bought Hermes and are building that into Ethereum and figuring out how it accrues value back to the Matic token, I think all the optimistic rollups from a business perspective are going to have a tough time competing with what I think is by far the best ZK rollup solution that they bought, paired with the network effect that they have. So I don't think we should ignore Polygon. I definitely don't think we should ignore um, optimism. Maybe we don't want BSC on the interface right now because it's just a lot. Like there's like 6 of them there, right? Like I think we kind of gotta pick 2, at least hide them from the interface for now, and then we like work on really building out 2 of their ecosystems, and then maybe we bring on a 3rd, right? But I think that should be how we're kind of looking at business, well, like liquidity enhancement development on the Smart Alpha side. But just so everyone knows, that is partially what's kind of been slowing down us, just like creating a bunch of them, is like if we go launch like wrap stake ohm pool, like that big fund was asking us to, like I think we did the math that like you need 16 to $30 million in each pool, like on Ethereum mainnet in current gas conditions, or at least like a few weeks ago when they were worse, in order for it to be profitable for the protocol. Well, on a layer 2 like Polygon, that's like 5 cents a transaction. Like you're talking about like you could have $10,000 pools and they'd be profitable, right? Like it's just $500 transaction versus 5-cent transaction. So like we need to take this into account that if we just go launch on like Ethereum mainnet and wrap stake ohm has $8 million in it, like that may seem like a huge win to us, but we're actually losing money and it's unsustainable. And then we have to port the liquidity over. So I think like whatever we do for wrap stake ohm, we need to, my gut says Polygon is probably where their deepest liquidity is, but we need to do that research to figure that out. Like not just us, like I think kind of the whole community, when we propose something, we can find out like, does this have a chain link oracle? If, does this have liquidity pools here? This is the deepest liquidity. And then we also need to think like, if there's $16 million of liquidity there, we can't assume that all the liquidity is going to be in that pool, meaning like, well, no, it's way cheaper if it's on Polygon at that point. But I think we need to do that math, right? Like maybe we get 5% of this pool. Like if we opened up Bond USDC on base Ethereum right now, we literally would have to have like 33% of the entire treasury in there for it to be profitable, and then the DAO would not activate. That's why Bond USDC isn't up there right now. But if we put it on Polygon, then it's not as much of a problem. Why why do you want USD Smart Alpha? You're trying to build like a crazy ass like zero risk. What are they? Zero coup. I've always thought that if you make a pairing like that, you could build zero coupon bonds on top of it, but that's a story for another day. And that would be a ton of gas fees. So like we really need layer 2s for that. I'm actually interested in why would you use USDT, USD, or Luna USD. And I actually am seriously want to know this because it may open up concepts on the lending side that we were talking about earlier. Single-sided products like Smart Yield bring the most users. Crypto Benji, I don't think Smart Yield is completely single-sided. I think if we have enough users, it doesn't matter. But like right now, we didn't on Smart Yield. I think that there are some very small things about Smart Yield that need to be fixed that would drive a ton of usage to Smart Yield. And like I think it's 90 to 95% a good like amazing product because we kind of built there was MPH 88 or whatever. We looked at it and like their contracts were bunk back then. They've gotten a lot better. But like we didn't really have like real competitors to kind of like sniff at what they were doing and like get ideas off of, even though all of our competitors had that for us. I think now that I've seen none of the none of the fixed income protocols have found product market fit. Like I've looked deeply into them and like I literally know the largest developer or the depositors. It's like 80% of their deposits on Element. And so like they're expecting an airdrop. That's artificial usage right now, right? Like now I think they have a wonderful product. I'm not going to shit on that team. I respect them. Same as I'm not trying to shit on MPH 88. They really improved their products with the V2. So we have to stay competitive because competition's coming and usage will come. But now that we kind of have things to look at that other groups have done, like even concepts that like Pendle's done, I think that there's just I almost think we could get away with doing small iterations to Smart Yield, as opposed to kind of maybe completely changing up aspects of it. But I also want to hold my tongue on that to see the success or efficacy of fiat, because if fiat is successful and takes care of the liquidity side, then yeah, there's a lot less wrong with Smart Yield V1 than I think that maybe the community's perception is. So just explaining kind of where my head's at on stuff. I don't really always make all these decisions. Smart Yield, yeah, it could be. We need to just get Smart yields closer to other platforms to be competitive. Yeah, I think you're right. And that was something, if you were on the beginning, I was talking about a good idea for that. I think Fiat DAO is going to help Smart Yield. And I also think it's going to drive like a metric of like where the gaps are. Like we can assume that we know where the gaps are, but let's say that like Element's bonds there are way more utilized than ours and ours are punished in the market. We're going to know why. That BarnBridges aren't at a premium, or maybe BarnBridges are, and it shows us that we actually are the premier one if you remove all incentives, right? So I think that that's going to help, right? And hopefully it brings us massive amounts of liquidity. Types of wrong community. No, I have small brain. Nah, you're smart. I like what you're saying. I think yeah, so it would be DPEG risk protection. I mean, how big do y'all think that the DPEG risk protection is though? Because I've thought about it for the same reason. But the problem is Opium Finance created like Tether DPEG risk insurance and like nobody fucking used it. So like there's nothing wrong with opening the pools up and marketing like that. I just like I don't know, would anyone on this call or like talk actually use this as stablecoin DPEG? Just say, yeah, I would personally put 10% of my portfolio in betting on that, right? Because if the answer is no, then maybe it's not worth it. Mike, do we need to reopen junior incentives to support fiat? I don't think so. I mean, I honestly think fiat is is like an incentive in and of itself for juniors, because or for seniors, because seniors you couldn't move out of the position, right? So like I think that this is an added benefit if through it we decide that so like smart yield v1 with fiat plugged into it, if we need to do incentives through our DAO, or we think that it would help us on the fiat platform, like absolutely. Like I mean, full disclosure, like I own a lot of fiat, right? Like so I have like incentive to push for that. I have to keep them separate in my head and say what I think is best for BarnBridge. I think what's best for BarnBridge is we kind of wait and see how everything rolls out with fiat. I also will say that there's a very high chance that I'm going to propose, um, I'm going to submit code of Smart Yield V1 with the borrowing power opened up to the DAO. And maybe I don't want a bunch of incentives going in there before that, just because then we have to port liquidity over, right? So that's just something to keep in mind if I'm apprehensive about doing it, because I think once that is open, then, I mean, this is one of my concerns with Smart Yield V2 altogether is what if fiat just works so well that there's $300 million in Smart Yield? Like, are we ever going to be able to release the Smart Yield V2? Because you have to port liquidity over unless you use something like the Diamond Standard that keeps state, and that's just not, we use the Diamond Standard on our DAO, but it's not on Smart Yield because it adds a little bit of like risk and tax on technical debt. So I will just say, like, Mike, I'd be interested in like your ideas around that, but like I don't think we should do it out of the gate. And I also want to get feedback on the cost and scope of adding that one feature before we add any incentives to V1. And then we really figure out if you open up the borrowing power and then fiat works, do you even need a V2, I guess? I wonder, yeah, actually, this is why I wanted you to answer this question because it gave me an idea. I wonder if, okay, so the deposit's in one or the other, right? So the deposit's in Tether to USD. Maybe it's as simple on Smart Alpha to open up the senior positions as it is on the Smart Yield side, where it's not going to be that simple, but basically only the senior side would be able to use it. But it's going to have to be what do you call it? Degraded rate from Aave. Because like in the same way that Smart Yield plugs into Aave or Compound, and you'd go deposit a stable coin or ETH on there, you could borrow against it. You just mimic the syndicate or the originator of that like deposit. So it's like technically possible to do. Now, being able to do it higher than Aave, I think you could do some clever things with like a lever loop like I talked about. But on the Smart Alpha side, it would have to be much, much lower because you don't know how that rebalance is going to happen. And so like if Tether did go unpegged and people were able to pull out of that position during that week period, how does that all get repaid and recuperated? So maybe there's a there. I honestly, it's been 2 hours and I drove 6 hours today, so I just like would need to think through that. But I will say that I think it's clever. I just haven't fully thought it through. And I would need some time to think it through and all the ways it would break financially. I see someone's typing, Mike, and nice. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna think about that. I think everyone should just understand like the ways it could break, I guess. I'm gonna answer like one or two more questions just because um shit, we haven't gone and gotten food. Oh, you ordered a pizza. I'm talking to you, E. Yeah, I'm gonna keep doing them. I probably shouldn't do them on Friday evening, because there's not as many people. But I think we recorded it. But more so, yeah, it's a pizza party for my wife. I can't eat pizza. I have celiac disease. But I'm gonna go get gluten-free pizza. The Terra USD is something I consider. Yeah, I mean I like Terra too. It's a centralized company, and so they have structures. They can innovate like a little quicker than DAOs. I'm still more bullish on synthetics long term, even if Suzu hates synthetics now. I still think they win long term. But I have nothing but respect for the Terra ecosystem. I mean, I'm not a maxi on anything. I support builders. So people that are building cool shit, I like them. I think Terra's building cool shit. All right, I don't think there's any more questions. Just probably collab with Ja Rule. I don't really talk to Ja Rule that much, but I had a fantasy football thing with him through League Out, and I was talking to him, and he was just sitting there like drinking dark liquor and smoking a blunt. I was like, this is kind of surreal. Like my 16-year-old self would be so pumped. For smart, it does smart you right. I'm trying to come in here and answer questions throughout the week too. So if I don't answer it on here, I can do stuff. I wish I could leave like voice chats and this, but all right, I've taken up y'all's time as much as y'all taken up mine because someone said we don't need any more of your time. So I will say like there's enough people on here that all of y'all's time is valuable as well. So the point is I appreciate all y'all like this is what y'all wanted to listen to on a Friday evening, and I think that's cool as hell. All right, cool. Well, I'm gonna jump, but I'm gonna be in the Discord all week, and I have so much work to do, and 95% of it is BarnBridge related. So I'll drop stuff in here.